on demand and enjoy it.
Thank you, guys. Last session of the day, huh? All right, we'll get you guys through it so much. So yeah, that's what I tell myself. So I'm the managing director over at On Demand. I'm also a independent chemical dependency counselor. I'm a substance abuse professional, and I'm a certified employee assistance professional. A lot of initials, lots of student debt, but it gives me an opportunity to talk to you guys today. So I've been in the drug testing industry for almost 20 years now, and I used to say that I've seen it all, but inevitably someone comes along and proves me wrong. So I don't say that anymore. But what we are seeing in this day and age is completely different than 15, 20 years ago. So what we're going to talk about today is, should you still drug test, overview of the BWC programs, oral fluid testing, which is really, really important that we have this conversation, and I'll tell you why, and then recovery-friendly work environments. I kind of want today to be a little bit more of a discussion, but I know it's the end of the day and we're kind of tired. So if I ask a question and you don't want to answer it, don't worry. I don't mind answering my own questions. But if we could have that conversation, I want you to feel comfortable asking questions, interrupting me by all means. I'd rather you guys ask the questions in real time than take a chance on possibly forgetting it. So I want to ask you guys a question first. And I want you to be honest here, okay? How many of you have either removed your drug testing policy or are very, very close to removing your drug-free program? Okay, so this is something that we are running into more and more. And a lot of times it's because we can't find good candidates. It's probably the number one reason that people are contemplating whether or not they should get rid of their drug-free programs, and I can appreciate that. We're also talking about maybe we're unsure of legal status. I was on the phone with one of our clients earlier this week, and she was talking about how she didn't want to get into trouble. She didn't want to deny somebody their right if they had a medical card. You know, how would that look, and all of these other things. And then also, I've talked to a lot of companies, even some today, that are multi-state employers. And so what's happening in New York, for example, is a lot different than Minnesota. Minnesota is a lot different than Nevada. Everyone's different than California. So, you know, depending upon where you're established is going to change those rules. We are entering territory of a legal foundation that has never been entered into before. And I'll talk to you guys a little bit about that as well. So what I want to start off with is creating a baseline for us to have this conversation here today, because we're all going to come to this conversation today from a different perspective, a different background. So let's start off with some facts, because a lot of times I'll go out and I'll do drug-free safety program trainings, do supervisor training, employee training, and I inevitably hear this from the majority of my companies. I don't care what my employees do when they're not on the clock. They're on the weekend, they want to do something. It's not my right to tell them what they can and cannot do. And I can appreciate that. I really, really can. And I'm not here to agree or to disagree with these statements. That's not my job here today. My job here today is to transfer information to you so you can make the right decision based upon what your needs are. But what I do want to say is that when I hear this, I almost inevitably am going to cringe. Oh, I'm going to do one of those because, well, I'll explain it. First of all, when we talk about drug testing, what we're saying is that use of controlled substances without a physician's authorization is prohibited for employees. So then we're like, okay, well, physician's authorization, medical card's okay. Not really. Don't worry, we'll talk about that as well. Unlike alcohol, the use of illicit drugs is not linked to specific times in relation to performance of workplace duties. Now, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that illegal use of controlled substances is prohibited, whether such use is on duty, off duty, or at any time. So let's say that we are one of those employers and we're going to say, hey, listen, whatever you do in your own time is your business. I don't care about it. Just make sure that when you show up to work Monday morning, you're sober and you're focused on safety. That's what we need you to do. And I think that that's a great way. So let's say we have an employee and they go on vacation and they're going out to Las Vegas. While they're in Las Vegas, they decide to indulge in an edible. They've heard a lot about them. They thought, hey, I'm going to try an edible. And they try an edible. They don't remember the experience, but they have one. Now, all of a sudden, they come back to work the following week, maybe on a random Wednesday, they're involved in an on-the-job accident. Maybe that was their fault, maybe there wasn't, but per your policy, you're going to do a drug screen. And we're going to find out real quick that what happened in Vegas didn't stay there. And now all of a sudden, you have a positive drug screen. And you have a positive drug screen on an employee that's been with you for 15 years, an employee that you count on every single day. And your policy is a zero-tolerance policy. Aw, hell, what are we supposed to do? This is a problem that is plaguing industries and companies across the country because there is so much misinformation about what a drug screen actually is. Let me be very clear today. There is no attempt based on a drug test to ever determine if the individual is under the influence of or impaired by drugs. We don't have that availability just yet. Drug testing is a mechanism to determine if the employee has used a prohibited drug. So there's a coalition out there right now in the state of Ohio that is trying to regulate marijuana like alcohol. And if it could be done, rock on. It cannot be done. It is scientifically, as of today, impossible to do so. Not only have we not determined a level of impairment of THC, we have not even agreed on a way of accurately measuring it. Alcohol, we got this down. We can do a blood test, we can do a breath alcohol test. And you know, if you're out on the road and you get pulled over and you're above a 0.08, you're going to jail. You're getting arrested. Why? 0.08. If you're at work, you can't be at work with a blood alcohol concentration of above a 0.04. If you're DOT regulated, 0.02 is going to be your cutoff to be on the road. 02, 04, 08. I like numbers. Numbers are something we like to call legally defensible. And so if I walk into a company and I'm going to give you a breathalyzer, how you're walking, how you're talking, whether or not we're making eye contact is irrelevant to me. What's going to matter to me is that number that's coming up on that machine. That number is going to determine whether or not you're positive for alcohol, and if, in fact, you are legally under the influence of that drug. Alcohol is the only substance that we can currently do that for. The only substance, which is making the legalization of marijuana a bit of a, what would be called a sticky wicket, if you will, because it's muddying these waters. But even so, we're still, so because of those muddied waters, employers are going, listen, I still need to find candidates. I don't want to lose my employee that's been with me for 15 plus years because they're a great employee. If their doctor is telling them that they can do something, like, who am I to tell them that they can't, right? So I get all of that. So what's happening is that companies are now starting to question their entire drug testing program. And as somebody who's been in this industry and somebody who gets to go across the country and talk about these things, that terrifies me. What happens when you remove your drug-free testing programs? As I mentioned, many companies are questioning this. But remember, your drug-free programs, they're not just testing for marijuana, are they? They're not. They're testing for a whole myriad of different substances. Remember why we started drug testing in the first place. When we talk about the history of drug testing, we're going to have to go back to the late 70s. In the late 70s, we know that after the Vietnam War, the individuals that were in our military, okay, so I got to work alongside a JAG officer many years ago. He was retired, a wealth of information, phenomenal man to talk to. He got to telling me about when, back in the 70s, they instituted a drug-free program. And they just drug tested members of the military. And the Department of Defense, within 2 years, shut the program down. Anybody want to guess why? Too many positives, that's right. And they didn't know what to do because there was no retribution. There was no punitive effects if somebody tested positive. They were just like, okay, well, this is positive, so well, what are we going to court-martial them? Is like, what do we do? Like, what do we do? They didn't know because they didn't anticipate the amount of positives that they actually got, which is kind of terrifying. But this then led to them in 1982 going to defending forensic drug testing. And the reason why, and this is what's important, is because of something that's called the USS carrier, the Nimitz. This happened right before, 1982, right before that. We had 14 Navy personnel that were on that aircraft carrier, and it crashed. It killed all 14. Over half of them had marijuana in their system. This is what really finally was that straw that allowed them to move forward. Well, once that got done, then we had to look at other government organizations like the Department of Transportation. And with the transportation, we know about a very famous, what I call very famous, one fatal accident. This happened in Maryland in 1987. If you've ever sat through one of my drug-free trainings, you've heard about this train accident. I included in every one because it is so critical that we understand this. 16 people died and 174 people were injured because 2 people thought getting high before they went to work was no big deal. What had happened was there were 2 men that were operating a 3-car Conrail train, and they moved past a closed switch. They weren't paying attention, right? And unfortunately, the Amtrak train's going about 120, 125 miles per hour, and there was no way that it could be stopped. Well, not without colliding, and that's exactly what happened. And federal railroad officials came out and said that it was confirmed the two individuals that were operating the three-car Continental train had definitely used marijuana before the fatal accident. So this allowed us to then reevaluate our Drug-Free Workplace Act, 1988 Act, and then in 1991 we passed the Omnibus Transportation Testing Act. So why am I bringing this up to you? Well, I believe we always have to look at our foundation if we want to continue to build, right? If you have a shaky foundation, you want to build a house, your house isn't going to last too long. I don't care how pretty it is on the outside. Foundation is everything. So when people want to know, why, Ruth, do I want to keep my drug testing program? Why should I still be making my employees go through pre-employments or randoms or post-accident testing? The answer is safety. We know without a doubt that drug-free workplace programs are all about deterrence and risk mitigation. And that's why you are all here today. You are all here today at this conference for one reason: safety. And while we don't want to overlook drug testing, we need to also understand it's changed a little bit. So when we look at companies that have removed their drug-free policy, we start seeing increases in things like workplace theft, destruction of equipment, workplace violence is going to be increased, higher absenteeism, lower productivity. We're also going to have higher turnover rates. And we can't get people to come to work as it is. Right? We don't need any help in getting that turnover rate increased. Right? Performance problems, medical costs, and probably one of the most detrimental aspects here is that good employees leave when nothing is done. I mean, think about it. Would you work next to somebody you know is coming into work high every single day or coming in drunk every day? My life is going to be worth more than that. And I also had a client when I was doing counseling one-on-one. I had a client who had 8 years sobering, and he was with his company while he was using. They kept him. They made sure that he got to his meetings. They've been very, very supportive. He loved this company, loyal to a fault, until he was working next to somebody who he knew for a fact was shooting heroin in the bathroom about 5 times a day. He knew it. Why? Because he lived that life. That's why he knew it. He went to his supervisor repeatedly. He ended up having to put his notice in at that job because it was a trigger for him. And he had to get out of that environment. God bless him for doing so, but that company lost a hell of an employee that would have been loyal till the end just because they were overlooking something that was so critical to them. So we have to realize that this is going to affect more than just your bottom line. This is going to affect your company culture, your environment, all of those things. But we know that safety hazards are just going to be the start. So the U.S. Department of Labor has reported that drug and alcohol abuse in the workplace causes 65% of on-the-job accidents, and almost 16% of emergency room patients injured at work have alcohol in their system. 40% of all industrial workplace fatalities are caused by individuals with substance use disorders, some of whom may not have realized the danger they're creating because they're thinking of use or using, and therefore they're causing these distractions. Additionally, of those Americans who die at work, 10 to 20% of them have a positive result when they're tested for drugs or alcohol. Now, it's hard to make that correlation exactly. That's why we have that big kind of wide 10 to 20%. Were they under the influence, or did they just test positive? So we have to acknowledge those variables. But we do know that 38% to 50% of all workers' compensation claims are related to abuse of alcohol or drugs in the workplace. Now, when we look at fatalities at our companies as a whole, not just the ones related to drug and alcohol, I'm talking about all fatalities, over 8% are now due to overdose on the job. That was not something we had to even measure for 10 years ago. 8.1% of all fatalities on the job due to unintentional drug overdose. 40% of all theft at the workplace, and individuals are going to be performing at about 67% of their potential. So there goes that good employee that's about to quit because, well, not only are they in danger, but now they're doing twice as much work. As you can see, it affects everybody. So with those with substance use disorders do not have to misuse drugs and alcohol on the job to have a negative impact on the workforce. As a matter of fact, an individual who is inebriated or even hung over, they're going to be calling off, they're going to be coming in late every single day. They may not be coming to work drunk, but their drinking and their alcoholism and their addiction is definitely negatively affecting the workplace. We also know that on-the-job accidents caused by inebriation or hangovers are 5 times more likely to actually cause personal injury. So now think about your workers' compensation claims that are going up because of these increased to personal injuries. Those numbers can become astronomical. Now, I'm not going to read each and every one of these to you, but what I do want to note to you is what this is saying to us is that over the past 25 years, drug test positivity rates have continually declined among employers with an existing drug testing policy program in effect. So let's say that you're a company and you've gone 20 years and you've never had a drug-free policy. I guarantee you that if I come in there, we're going to either have people who are going to walk out, or you're going to have a 5 to 7% positivity rate. Right off the cusp. I don't even need to know what you're doing. I don't even need to know what you do. I don't even know how many employees you have. That's the standard. And if you continue with that drug-free program, I can also say to you, but by your third year, that will be down to maybe 1% or 1.5%. Right? That's the impact that we're seeing here. We know that from 1988 to 2012, we went down from 13% to 3.5% on a national average for, again, companies who are drug testing. So these statistics are suggesting that drug use is at a higher rate than is detected among our drug testing clients, which is lending credibility to the fact that drug testing programs do, in fact, deter drug use. We know this. There are many, many, many scientific studies and things that I can put up here for you. I'll give you guys my contact information. My business cards are up here. Happy to always share that information. But we can see over and over again that the importance of drug testing is more important now than it's ever been. The U.S. Department of Labor has stated that more than 60% of adults know someone who has come to work under the influence or impaired by drugs. As supervisors, you're going to be the last to know. HR, safety, the last to know. Why? Because you're the one that's going to do something about it. That's why. And if I'm working next to Bob over here, and I know Bob's going through a hard time with his wife, and they're about to get a divorce, and they're having a hard time, so Bob's drinking every single night, I'm not going to come and get it and make him lose his job too, because I like Bob. Bob's a good dude. Right? I'm not going to do any of those things. Right? That's not how that's going to work. So you have to understand your position in this is that you may not know right away in order to do that intervention, to intervene at that time. In other words, what you need to be responsible for is to do everything in your power to prevent this from happening in the first place. And that is by creating standards and boundaries right from the get. Now, this is statistics that look at all of the different types of substances. So alcohol is number one. Marijuana, you can see, pain relievers, cocaine, hallucinogens. This is really what I want to bring everybody's attention to. Past month substance use, over 165 million people in the last month. That's over half of our population. If you don't think it's at your job, well, again, let's get them tested and find out. It's the only way you're going to know. We also know that over 40 million Americans, it's about 1 in 7, are addicted to alcohol or other drugs. So you either have, you are now, or you will in the future work alongside someone that's battling an addiction. And it's just important that we know what that is, we know what that looks like, and we're doing things in our power to acknowledge that. One of the reasons that overdose has climbed to the level that it's climbed to, and one of the biggest problems that we're seeing in our workplaces, is something that DEA calls the single deadliest drug threat our nation has ever encountered. Now, in 2021, for the first time ever, our yearly death toll due to drug overdose hit the 6-figure mark, going to be over 107,000 people in America dying from a drug overdose. 2022 numbers are a little over 110,000. So these numbers have continued to increase. We started to level off a little bit in 2019. Pandemic hit, we jumped almost 30% in 1 year. And we've continued on that climb. 67% of those deaths are attributed to fentanyl. Most of the time, they're being taken without even knowing that they're taking fentanyl because they're mixing it in with everything. This is one of the most startling statistics that I've ever come up with. And by the way, this is what I do. I research and I speak, right? So I look at a lot of stats, and this terrifies me. Well, this is, okay, so this is only a 3-year mark. We're looking at 2018 to 2021. I have genes older than that, right? But look, in 2018, the amount of pills containing fentanyl that were seized by law enforcement were 290,000 pills. In 3 years, it's almost 10 million. 10 million. Bless you. That should scare everybody. We have a legitimate oxy over here, and we have counterfeit oxys over there. Somebody who got hurt on the job and their doctors quit prescribing to them and they start getting sick when they don't have one of these pills, they're just desperate to get back to work tomorrow. They're not trying to get high, and we got to kind of get past that idea. But we have to realize that these are being used by people who are trying to get back to work every day, and they don't know that what they're taking is counterfeit. But these people who are pushing fentanyl, they're not going to stop at just some counterfeit pills. Oh no. They want to get as much of the market as they possibly can. Why? because fentanyl is extremely addictive. And if you can get somebody hooked on fentanyl, you got a customer for a long time, well, until they die. Candy, we've got some toffee up there. State public health leaders have warned of rainbow fentanyl. We have some things that look like Flintstone gummies, Flintstone vitamins, excuse me. This is what's happening at TSA right now. An actual TSA video, photograph. We also have, these are different forms of fentanyl. You can see that one looks like Pop Rock candy. Tablets are over there, rocks, we have gum. Over here was in Calgary. I was in Calgary, Canada back in April. And I can assure you that this is terrifying. They have things that look like shredded wheat, but look at the Lego blocks. How many 30-year-olds are looking for Lego blocks, guys? 12-year-old kid will. And then we have more of that rainbow fentanyl. Now, we also have to look at another threat. Connecticut, New York, Washington, Idaho, Ohio, the states keep going, have confirmed that marijuana laced with fentanyl is a new public safety threat. This is not an urban legend, this is true. We have a man arrested, this is right over in Pennsylvania, a man arrested for allegedly having 3 pounds of fentanyl-laced marijuana. We have New York officers who are warning for illegally purchased marijuana laced with fentanyl. Now, the only kind of thing that we could possibly debate upon is whether or not this marijuana is being laced intentionally, or if it's just because it's around the same product when it's getting cut. Do you care? I don't care. All I need to know is that there's marijuana that's being laced with fentanyl. How it's getting in there, I'm not going to really debate about that too much. So this is when we have to start having that conversation about marijuana. Now, I, again, right, am not here to express my opinions in one way or another. I want to make sure everybody has information, and that's what I want to give you guys today. So let's look at marijuana on the workforce. We have a few problems with marijuana. One is myths versus facts, real world issues, what's affecting you and what can you do about it. So first we have to address the legal status of marijuana. Over 38 states have legalized marijuana in one form or another, as we know, including Ohio. But the federal government still has classified this as a Schedule I drug. A Schedule I drug means that there's absolutely no reason that that should be in a person's body. That's right up there with heroin and PCP, all right? That's where they put marijuana at. So some people want to say, well, we should reschedule it. Well, there's been a case that's been brought to the DEA and the HHS and other organizations. Maybe we should reschedule it. It's not the first time this has been brought up. And time again, it has been determined by scientific minds that whatever benefit comes from it is far outweighed by the detriment that marijuana causes a human's body. We don't see those reports all the time. Maybe there's more science that we can do. There's a lot more science that we can do, and that's exactly what we need to do. But for purposes of work, what you guys need to know is that, first of all, each state has a different set of rules and regulations. No two states are the same because there's no federal oversight, right? And what you can test for and under what reasons you can test for are going to differentiate based upon those states. Now, the other myth that I get a lot from people is telling me that they have a prescription for marijuana. And I always have to say, no, you don't. You don't. I'm sorry, you don't. You don't. Not just in Ohio. Nobody has a prescription for marijuana. Prescriptions are governed by the FDA. FDA is a federal organization. Federal organization has already said it's illegal. So therefore, you're not going to walk into Walgreens or Rite Aid or CVS and fill your cannabis prescription. That's why doctors are issuing recommendations to patients. Recommendations are basically a permission slip from a doctor saying that this might benefit my patient. Some of the biggest differences here is that prescriptions come with a designated dosage, possible drug interactions, allergic information, instructions for use. Recommendations do not. You get a 90-day supply. There you go. If you go through it within a week, you go through it within a week. 90-day supply. Okay. So we also have a lot of different forms and foods that are out there right now. We have cannabis gum, we have patches, tinctures, liquid marijuana, marijuana vaping. Up there are some edibles for you. You can see some reefers, some star buds, M&Ms. My personal favorite is Stonios, not because I've tried them, just because it's unique. The Snickers, THC Snickers. Yeah, all right. But look at those. If you look at the Cheetos, which is right in the front, I don't know if I can get to, yeah, right here. The only indication that those are not just regular flaming hot Cheetos is that little square right there in the corner. Yeah, and every time I say that, I always get people that are going, well, no one's going to give your kids free drugs. Listen, I have 2 boys, and they will cut you for a gummy bear, so I don't even know what people are thinking. Like, they see some Cheetos, they're getting some Cheetos. Yeah. So those are some of the biggest. One of the other myths that we get is people who are saying CBD will not cause a positive on a drug test. So let me clear this up for everybody. We have 2 problems with CBD, which is completely legal, by the way, and there's science behind CBD, nothing against CBD. The problem is over-the-counter CBD is currently unregulated, all right? That means that there's no FDA approval, there's no standardization test, there's no way that what you get one day in one bottle is gonna be the same thing that you get in the next day from that bottle. All right, labels are not going to tell the whole story. There was a study done by the FDA in 2019 by the major CBD manufacturers in this country, and they found that 74% of the products they were tested did not contain what the label said they contained. Many of them, you ready? Didn't even contain CBD. But it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, so we got a lot of people who are jumping on that bandwagon. CBD in its pure form, there's a lot of science behind it. And there's some detriments, but if you know about it, you can weigh the good and the bad. There's detriments to Tylenol, for the love of God, right? So you have to know. But even with those trace amounts that are legal by law, which is 0.03% THC content, not enough to get you high, but there is enough to build up in your system. And what this means is that CBD does have a potential to indicate a positive. I'm not saying it's probable, I'm saying it's possible. And a positive for THC is still a positive for THC, doesn't matter how it gets into somebody's system. So as we continue with our myths versus facts, we have to notate that it's become increasingly difficult to separate fact from fiction for this conversation, yet it's more important than ever to do just that. When you look at these studies, these scientific studies that are done, what we have to now do is look at who funded the study and see who's supporting it and who's behind it and pretty much who's put their label on it, because that has a lot to do. But I'm going to show you guys an example of what I'm talking about here. So the first myth that I want to talk about is that marijuana is safer than alcohol. A lot of people say this to me. Well, marijuana is safer than alcohol, isn't it? Well, the Washington Post put out an article, and the headline of the Washington Post stated, "Stoned drivers are a lot safer than drunk ones, new federal data show." Oh, awesome. Okay. So I can get high and drive and I'm going to be okay. Like, that's how I'm reading that title. And it says a new study, technically 2015, but I'll give them that, from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration finds that drivers who use marijuana are a significantly lower risk for a crash than drivers who use alcohol. And after adjusting for age and blah, 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 they found that drivers who tested positive for marijuana were no more likely to crash than those who had not used any drugs or alcohol prior to driving. This is a Washington Post news article. So now if I'm pro-marijuana, I'm going to cite this every chance I get. And I'm going to say, nope, hey, listen, federal data shows. This is what it shows. But this is where we have to be smarter than the average bear. We have to look at this. Drivers who tested positive for marijuana were no more likely to crash than those who had not used any drugs or alcohol prior to driving. Why would that statement be an issue? Anybody want to take a guess? Hint, I gave you the answer in the first slide. It's okay, I'll answer my own questions. I'm good with that today. The fact of the matter is, there's a whole host of factors why detectable drug presence does not indicate impairment. So I'm that person who went to Vegas. I'm the one who ate those Stonios, those edibles. I came back to work and someone was like, hey, you use marijuana. Let's find out if you're okay to drive. Well, it's Tuesday. Used a week ago. Guess what? I'm going to be okay to drive. I'm still going to test positive for THC. So now I look at that study and I'm like, wait a second. We weren't looking at impairment at all. We were looking to see if somebody tested positive for THC, and we've already indicated that we cannot determine impairment on that. So that study means nothing. That means nothing. Because most psychoactive drugs are chemically complex molecules whose absorption, action, elimination from the body are difficult to predict. And so when we look at that in regards to alcohol, is more predictable. We have more science behind it. We know those things, okay? In heavy marijuana users, measurable amounts of THC can be detected in the body days or even weeks after the last use, long after those psychoactive effects are already gone. Right? So you can kind of see where those problems are starting to go. Plus, a recent report that came out in May of this year, so May of 2023, found out that post-accident workforce drug positivity for marijuana reached a 25-year high. Quest Diagnostics and analysts published in May showed that post-accident tests have been steadily increasing since 2012, so 10 years. We have had a 204% increase of post-accident positivity rates. But I'm sure it's safe. That article from the Washington Post told me it was fine, so it's not going to be an issue at all when I allow marijuana on the job. According to Quest Diagnostics, the increase in positive tests corresponds to the legalization of marijuana in states across the country. In other words, you put a graph up here on the states that have legalized it, and the graph right underneath it is going to match it when we look at post-accident drug tests. A couple of other myths that I want to go over is someone thinks that marijuana is not addictive. Any chemical, yes, you have a question? So they used a percentage of accidents. So if let's say we use the control as 100% of accidents, they would compare them to drug screens from 10 years ago. And if we did 50 post-accident drug screens 50 years ago and 50 post-accident drug screens this year, the amount of percentages of positives increased. So it wasn't the amount of accidents necessarily, but it was the percentage of positivity rates increased. So we can't determine causality, and that's one of the biggest things when we look at statistics on either side of this argument. All we can say is that based upon data from Quest, and I'll get you guys the full report, by the way, happy to do so. Yeah, just I'm saying, well, I mean, if you like it, I like numbers, it's okay, right? Judge-free zone. But if you look at the numbers, what it is saying is that there is a 204% increase of positive for marijuana in those post-accidents. Now, there's also studies that show the amount of accidents, whether they've increased or not, which I didn't bring those with me today. This is more about just looking at the positivity rates have increased. Now, whether or not marijuana caused those accidents, we've already established. We can't determine that because we can't determine impairment. All we're able to say is that the amount of people with marijuana in their system at the time of the accident has increased. That make sense? Awesome. Great questions, guys. Other problem is that marijuana is not addictive. Anything you put into your body that stimulates part of the brain can become addictive to you. That's melatonin, that's everything, okay? Understand how addiction works in the brain. So this is definitely possible. A study has estimated that 3 in 10 people who use marijuana habitually have marijuana use disorder, which is an addiction. Another study has estimated that people who use cannabis have about a 10% likelihood of becoming addicted. So we have to realize it is definitely addictive. Is it as addictive as heroin or fentanyl? Heavens no, but it doesn't mean it's not addictive at all. Another one is that you can't overdose on marijuana. Now here I'm gonna play the devil's advocate here. When we think of overdose, we think of heroin overdose, we're gonna die. But I want you to think about alcohol overdose. We don't call it overdose, do we? We call it alcohol toxicity. That's right, alcohol poisoning. So I want you to look at marijuana kind of like that. There's something out there that's called cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. I can't say that word correctly. We're going to call it CHS. It is a condition caused by long-term cannabis use or when we've had a sharp increase of THC in our cannabis. And people are definitely going to the emergency room with episodes of nausea, vomiting, dehydration. We are seeing this in young adults, and this has increased across our country. So it is possible. It's just not the overdose that we hear about because it's not, we don't need the Narcan people using marijuana. All right, so then another thing that I hear a lot of is what's the big deal? It's the same stuff I grew up knowing. I'll let you guys read that one. It's a little funny. I gotta laugh or you cry, right? But it's insanely accurate. So when we talk about THC content, remember that THC is the psychoactive substance in marijuana. It's what gives people the euphoric feeling in their brain. Many people who have voted for legalization thought that they were talking about the same marijuana from the 60s and 80s where THC content is less than 2%. However, without any clear guidelines, remember, it's been the wild, wild west in this organization for THC, CBD. The cannabis industry has taken a page from the tobacco industry and alcohol, and they've developed strains of marijuana and concentrated marijuana products with much higher concentrations. Some plant strands are now at 32% THC, allowing the extraction process to hit 99% THC. I want to be clear, we have absolutely zero of medical knowledge of what that does to a person's body long term. We don't know. We're going to find out, but we don't know right now. The more potent a drug is, the stronger the possibility of addiction, and the more likely the person is going to continue to purchase that product because you're also going to be getting addicted to that euphoric feeling that you're having. So between 1995 and 2015, there's been a 212% increase in THC content in the marijuana flower. In 2017, the most popular strains found in dispensaries in Colorado have a range between 17 and 28%. All right, and increasingly, this is interesting, the plants that have higher THC have to have lower CBD, which is the chemical that everyone talks about being health beneficial towards you. So higher THC usually means lower CBD. We also know that because it's affecting our brain, it's a psychoactive substance, it's affecting our brain. Alcohol does the same thing. So does, cocaine, all of those drugs. But we all know that about alcohol and cocaine and crack and meth. For some reason, we continue to overlook it when it comes to marijuana. Marijuana becomes more potent. Cases of marijuana-associated psychosis arose. It does have hallucinogenic properties once it gets over that 40% THC mark. We also know that cannabis potency is linked to addiction, and they have an increase of likelihood of developing anxiety disorder. That's why when it went to Ohio a couple of years ago to add autism and anxiety to the list of acceptable medical conditions to get your medical card, they were both denied because, believe it or not, it will increase anxiety and it increases panic attacks. We also know that cannabis use is associated with higher prevalence of suicidal ideation, plan, and attempt among U.S. young adults with or without depression, and the risks are greater for women than for men. So you look at the correlation between the prevalence of marijuana use and the prevalence of suicidality in our schools, and you start to see a correlation. Again, I'm not saying that there's a causality here, but I'm saying there's a correlation. So maybe depressed people are using this and they're still doing that. I don't know. What I'm saying is that we need more information. We need to have more science on these things. We legalize something that, believe it or not, we don't know very much about. And I believe in going full force into something that we have every bit of information available to us. If a doctor prescribed you 60 oxycodones right now, you should know the risk you're going to take with that prescription. And you should be able to say, I'm not okay with that, doc. Can I just get some ibuprofens instead? Right? Because you're going to know those risks. Maybe you're in so much significant pain, you're like, please, yes, I need help, right? Listen, that's between you and your doctor, but I'm saying you know the risk. And that's what our problem is with marijuana. We don't know what we don't know. We need more science, that's all I'm saying. So, oh my goodness, now what? Legalization isn't going to be stopped. Impairment cannot currently be detected. So how do you know if your employees use that morning on the job, the day before, the week before? You don't. You don't know. You don't know. We want safe work environments, but we also need environments with employees. So what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? Well, I know that it's easy for us to think that hope is gone, right? We can't do anything. We have to get rid of drug testing altogether, but there's actually some other options we can talk about. I don't want you to give up hope. You're not alone on this. Companies really all across the country are running into the exact same problems that we're seeing right now. What am I supposed to do? Am I going to become a marijuana-friendly employer? Listen, if that's good for you, by all means. But if it's not good for you, how do you navigate those waters? And if it is good for you, what liability are you going to be assuming? Trust me, the questions aren't going to end anytime soon. Even I don't have all the answers for these. But what is critical is that we don't lie to ourselves, okay? To get through this, we have to know the facts. And the fact is, marijuana is not safe. It's no safer than alcohol. It's no safer than any of the other. It's safer than fentanyl, I'll give you that. But it's not 100%. It's not like you're taking vitamin C here. It's a psychoactive substance. It affects the way your brain interprets information, and therefore, It has to be regulated as such, just to be safe. You don't want somebody who's smoking marijuana driving down the road next to you. Well, if you're the Washington Post, I guess it's okay. It's not the same substance many people grew up knowing. Marijuana on the job is deadly. We have several reports on that. Being under the influence at work is deadly. I don't care what substance it is. All right, opioids, meth, cocaine, crack, and new designer drugs are increasing in use every single day as well. So knowing all of this, how can you move forward? Well, you have to know what your options are, and you have to make choices that make sense for your company and for your industry. So the options, well, you can have customized drug-free panels. So you can remove THC from your drug testing panels if you are not under BWC drug-free safety program or federal regulations. Currently, you cannot remove those and stay in compliance. But if you're outside of those, you can definitely remove THC from your panel, okay? I know that On Demand offers that panels. I'm sure other companies that like ours do that as well. So that is something that you can do. You also want to make sure if you are going to remove THC from your panel that you are increasing the knowledge for all supervisors to properly identify the signs and symptoms of use as well as proper documentation, because if you are going to have somebody come to work under the influence, you have to know how to handle that situation. Remember the OSHA general duty clause. It is your responsibility to provide safe work environments for these people. So that includes supervisors being able to do a reasonable suspicion drug screen. And you also may want to look at alternate means of testing. So for example, well, you know what? Hold up. We need to back up for a minute. I want to look at your current drug testing program. We can't talk about change. Let's see where things are right now in the state of Ohio. Right now we have the BWC drug-free safety program. How many of you are currently in drug-free safety program? Advanced, basic, one of the two, right? Comparable? Okay. Anybody in comparable programs? Remember this year, training requirement. Contact me today. No, but don't forget there is a training. I don't want anybody to get in trouble. So drug-free safety programs, voluntary safety program is developed to address workplace use. We all know this. And there's a lot of rules, a lot of regulations, a lot of information about the drug-free safety program. When we look at the BWC drug-free workplace program, they're at minimum the same drugs and levels that are required by the Department of Transportation. Employers are free to test for additional drugs, okay, but you can't go less than. Employers are going to make sure testing includes alcohol when there's a reason to suspect alcohol use and for post-accidents. And you have to have amphetamines, cocaine, ecstasy, which is MDMA, marijuana, opiates, and PCP, which is angel dust. As I mentioned, employers may choose to arrange testing for additional drugs, including those acknowledged in your area. So we're heavily laden with fentanyl in this area. If you don't have fentanyl in your program, you might want to look at testing for fentanyl. You don't have to, probably would be wise to do so, but you should never go less than the federal standard. So this is the federal standard. This is exactly what we see for Department of Transportation. So we have marijuana, cocaine, opioids, 6-acetylmorphine is heroin, hydrocodone, oxycodone, okay, two separate opiates, PCP, amphetamines, and then MDMA is going to be your ecstasy. All right, so that's the minimum that you can test for. DOT is the minimum. Question I get asked a lot, though, is why follow federal guidelines for non-federal tests? So I say to people, well, yeah, but we have to follow federal guidelines. Oh, I'm not DOT. Okay, I understand that, but there's two words everybody in here should be very well versed in knowing. And those words are legally defensible. All right, so if you're going to have a drug-free program or you're going to manage a drug-free program, these words are extremely important to you because there are very specific rules both on the federal and state level that kind of govern what you can do and what's going to be legally defensible. Legal defensibility can be defined as a company strategy for reducing exposure to legal risk. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't get sued. We live in a very liturgical society. I can sue you for just walking in front of me, I think. I'm not sure. But you'll find an attorney that can sue you, right? But what it does mean is that you want to be in the strongest position legally to defend your actions. And the way you're going to do that is by following the guidelines that have been approved by the federal government, because that is the federal government. And they're going to be the ones that are ultimately going to be the ones making the decision into whose favor this is. Right now, there are only 2 drug testing methods that have been officially endorsed by the federal government. Now, hair testing is legally defensible, but it's not regulated by the federal government, okay? Lab-based urine and now lab-based oral fluid. This is brand new, okay? Urine testing was the only method permitted for federal government mandated testing until this year. The positive lab result, by the way, should always be reviewed and verified by a medical review officer. When we talk about drug screens, we're talking about a couple other entities as well. So one of those is going to be the ADA. The ADA is an organization that's going to make sure that you don't discriminate on your employees based upon a medical condition. That includes prescription medication. So now if someone's come back positive for Xanax, and you get that drug because you don't want to do an MRO verification, and now all of a sudden you're going to terminate that employee because Xanax is a controlled substance and could affect their workplace. Well, you have just denied that person employment based upon a medical condition, and you're going to find yourself in a lot of hot water for that. We have to deal with organizations like the EEOC for discrimination. There's a lot of different organizations. There's the federal drug testing laws, the state drug testing laws. It's very important that you have a medical review officer, which is a doctor, review the prescription medication. You should not be doing that. Now, I understand there's like you can do other things if you're worried about safety sensitive positions. You can talk to me about that later if you have questions, but that is the rule of thumb there. Different types of testing do not measure the same thing. These are not apples to apples, right? So we have blood tests, which we don't use for employment purposes. We have oral fluid, urine testing, and hair testing. You can see the concentration in the hours, days, weeks, or months. You can see this is the difference. Let's look at the interval of detection can vary based upon the following. I get that question a lot from people. People will always say to me, okay, Ruth, how long is this going to stay in their system? Oh, well, that's a really hard question to answer. If I have a client, let's say somebody failed a drug screen for you, all right, and they have to come and see me for an assessment so they can get back on the job. So I'm going to have them in my office. I'm going to ask them questions like, how often do you use? And they're going to say, well, I was using about once a week. And I'm going to say, okay, how long were you doing that for? Oh, I did that for a couple of years. All right, so you're using, we'll say once or twice a week for a few years. And then I'm going to ask them this question. Was it the good stuff? Did you get the good stuff? Well, what do you mean? Did you get the medical grade? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay, that's going to have a higher THC content. And that means it's going to be in your system even longer. So now we could be looking anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks before you're going to test clean for that drug with a urine test. We have to look at all of these different variables. Edibles, for example, impairment is going to go 5 to 8 hours, while vaping is 1 to 3 hours, right? So like all of these different things go into this conversation. Look, urine testing is considered the gold standard. I think there's a pun there. I'm not sure. It is legally defensible. It's less expensive. It is the cheapest way to drug test. There's a wider array of panels, but it's also easier to cheat these drug screens. It's time consuming if someone can't produce a specimen when we need them to. And detection time can go from days to weeks, but it can also pick up recent use, which is important for us to know. We also have to look at instant tests versus lab send-out tests. This is a big question. Instant test or point of care testing, rapid testing, whatever you want to call it, that's going to be when you get the results the same day the test was taken. No lab was involved. It was done with an instrument, okay? Instants are unable to provide quantifiable, they're qualitative tests, okay? There's a higher probability for interference. So when somebody says, well, I tested positive for heroin because I drank tonic water, I always have to look and say, well, was it a point of care test or was it a lab test? You're still not going to test positive for heroin, but it is going to matter whether or not it's an instant test or not. They're also going to be indicators. They're not going to tell you the whole story. They're not legally defensible for employment decisions. I'm going to make sure that everybody understands that. So you have a pre-employment test and you're doing instant testing on all of them and they come back positive and you're like, sorry, no job for you today. That will not hold up. It has not, I should say. I can't predict the future. That has never held up in a court of law in the state of Ohio. All right, so not legally defensible for employment decisions, but let's say you have a construction company and your people are in a random testing program, but in order to get on this work site, you need a clean drug screen. Instant all day long, okay? Instant all day long, because it's an indicator, but it's not gonna, because you're not making an employment decision based on that, you're just getting them on a work site. They're still gonna work for you, but we're getting them on a work site. They're also not gonna be recognized by BWC or the DOT. Lab-based send-outs, on the other hand, are going to be quantifiable results. They're measurable results. You get a number. Confirmation testing completed for each positive. We're going to do GCMS testing on those. High level of accuracy, over 99.99999% accurate. So, therefore, legally defensible. Measures level over a period of time. They're also going to be measuring adulterants and dilution, obviously recognized by BWC and DOT. We also have hair testing, right? Hair testing is expensive. It is the most expensive type of testing that's out there, but it is going to give you a harder, you can't really cheat a hair test, and it's going to show a bigger picture, a bigger point of view. We're going to be looking for up to 30 to 90 days of use. That's the cutoff, is 90 days, but it's not going to pick up recent use. Your hair's got to grow. How fast is your hair going to grow? Right? Think about that. Your hair's got to grow. It's got to be in the roots. So if you use today and I test you tomorrow, I'm not going to get it out of your hair. It's not going to be there. You have to wait sometimes 4 to 7 days for first detection, and that's only if you used enough to be detected. So if you smoked one joint, it's probably not going to be picked up on a hair test. Okay, so this is good for continual use. If you have somebody who's in a program because they failed to test for you and they want to come back to work and you want to give them a hair test once a month to make sure, fine. That's fine. But for pre-employment purposes, I default to what you and your company needs, but that's up to you. Now we have oral fluid testing. Now, oral fluid testing in and of itself is not new. We've been looking at this for about a decade now. What is new is that January 1st of 2023, it has been approved on the federal level. This is a big deal. It's a big, big deal. It's more convenient. It's less invasive than urine testing. Shorter detection window. It's hard to cheat on these. They're more expensive for now. It's going to become highly competitive in the next year. You're going to start seeing those prices come down. Still does not determine impairment, though. Okay, still have a problem with that. But yesterday I had a phone call from a long-standing company. And they said, Ruth, I have a question for you. I need you to lower the time on that urine drug screen. I only want to know if they've been using for about a week. I can't do that. It's not how a urine test works. Like, it's not in my power. I can't do that. Like, it's going to go back as long as it's going to go back. I said, but what I could do for you, we could start your oral fluid testing program. Because that's only going to go back so long. Look at this. So it appears within 10 minutes, okay? And disappears after usually 24 to 72 hours. Some are 12 hours. It all depends. Again, remember all those variables that we talked about? So I'm going to tell you on an average, 24 to 72 hours. You can also learn to administer these yourself if you'd like. We have a certified trainer in the back of the room, Greg West, is happy to teach you how to do that. You can buy these kits. I would suggest you buy them from a reputable place because, again, one of the biggest problems that we have is that the Department of Transportation has published a final ruling, as I mentioned, okay? It's a significant change as the DOT previously allowed only urine drug testing for safety-sensitive positions. DOT's new final rule gives employers the option of using urine or oral. The rule requires employers to use oral fluid testing for transgendered or non-binary individuals when a direct observation is required. That's amazing. For same-gender technician cannot be found. That's a huge stride forward. The new rule became effective on June 1st, but here's the but. Employers are going to have to wait to implement until the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services have identified at least two laboratories, capable of processing the test. Currently, there's none that are certified. We're looking beginning of next year, beginning of 2024. Now, remember what we talked about BWC? I want you to look at the very, very first one here. BWC currently, right now, if you're part of the drug-free safety program, it states that employers have to arrange specimen collection and analysis that basically follows the federal testing model. So if the federal testing model has changed, will the BWC model follow suit? Well, if this is all it says, then it's going to have to, because the federal model is now going to be allowed for oral fluid testing. We also are going to see a lot more of these things. These are breathalyzer tests, okay? These are breathalyzers for marijuana use. Problem here is we cannot yet answer is whether breath measurement can be used to distinguish between a person who uses cannabis regularly or has not done so, and impairment has yet to be defined. Now, before you guys leave today, I do want to talk about the Substance Use Recovery and Workplace Safety Program. How many of you guys are familiar with this program? Oh, if you're not familiar with this program, but you're in the DSFP, you are leaving money on the table. It's a grant program, and you can get paid, you can get reimbursed, for your drug screens that you're doing, for policy development, for your trainings. All right, it's huge, it's huge. All right, it's brought to you in partnership with Recovery Ohio, the BWC. Eligible employers can enroll in the program. You can get reimbursement for many aspects of your drug-free program, including the cost of drug tests, training, even policy review. The reason that the Substance Use Recovery and Workplace Safety Program is around is because of the amount of positives. We're trying to encourage employers to retain employees that have failed a drug screen. We do not want zero tolerance policies. We want them to have an opportunity to go get the treatment that they need and to get back out on the job. And the Substance Use Recovery Workplace Safety Program, that's a mouthful, is here to help you guys do that. Okay? At both the basic and advanced levels of drug-free safety program, remember, employers must provide a list of local employee assistance resources to give to employees. If you're in the advanced, you have to provide them with a drug and alcohol assessment by a qualified professional, and you have to be responsible financially for that. Not the treatment, okay, but just for the assessment. And they expect you to give an employee who tests positive a second chance. That's the expectation of that program. So if you are already doing that, you are already in compliance with the substance use recovery, you can already apply for the grant money today. You can apply, I don't know when you're going to get it, but you can apply. So we do not, and this is what I want to say about this. Everyone paying attention right now? I'm going to blow your mind. You ready? For the substance use recovery workplace program, to get the reimbursement, not the 4 and 7% from drug-free safety program, but to be just a member. These are two separate organizations, two separate programs, I mean. You do not need to meet the federal guidelines. You know what that means? It means that while you drug test, you can remove THC from your panel if you want to, and you still would be qualified for this program. You still have to do lab send-outs, no instance, that's still not covered. But if you want more information, guys, I'm happy to do so. As we close up for today, I want everyone to remember we have to change our perspective, okay? We have to shift from using drug testing to catch bad or problem employees and start to realize that drug-free programs are saving lives, literally, either through increased safety on the job or by providing paths to recovery. Remember, your drug-free safety program begins with safety. That's why the safety is in the name, right? It integrates drug-free efforts into a company's overall safety process. And the drug-free safety program incorporates efforts to deter, to detect, to take corrective action, and address alcohol and other drug use. Now, you should think of your drug-free program as just an extension of your overall safety initiative. All right, that's what it's here. It's, again, you're not a cop. We're not trying to catch people. We're trying to provide safe work environments. As I mentioned, drug-free policies are literally saving lives. So as you leave here today, please make sure you understand the importance of a drug-free policy. If you're going back to your higher ups, or you're the one having these conversations and you're going, hey, I think we should probably stop drug testing, I am imploring you, I am begging you, please rethink that. If it's because of marijuana, give me a call. We will divine a policy that works for you, okay? But there are still many, many drugs out there. Drug overdose is still the #1 cause of accidental death in America. How many of you guys out here have teenagers, for example? I have 2. I don't like to admit it, but I'm going to. All right, and has anybody ever had to teach any of their children how to drive a car? I don't want to talk about that either. All right, but I want you to think about what you do when you put that teenager behind the car, right? Make sure you fasten your seatbelt. I'm going to buy a car with a lot of airbags. I have knee airbags. I don't know. I'm probably going to be very grateful for that one day. Maybe, hopefully not, right? But we have airbags. We have put your phone away, turn the radio down. We're going to send them to a course so they learn the proper ways. We're going to teach them how to drive. We're going to get them a permit. They're going to take a test. They have to get a license, all so they can be on the road. But I want you guys to remember, every time you're telling your teenager or your child, your kid, to fasten their seatbelt, Americans are more likely to die from a drug overdose in this country than you ever are a car accident. So if you're not having that conversation with them, you're missing a good percentage of all of this. Train supervisors and employees, get clarification if you need it. Check the panel of drugs that you're testing for. Encourage the use of a one-chance policy instead of a zero tolerance. So if you do have that 15-year employee or 20-year employee that you just love who makes a stupid mistake and uses CBD or goes to Vegas to have a good time, you don't have to terminate based upon your policy. It gives you an opportunity to bring them back to work, okay? And on the other side, if you have an employee who is struggling with addiction, who maybe fell off the wagon, somebody who is battling alcoholism or drug addiction and they slipped up and now they're falling back into that use. If they fail a drug screen, knowing that somebody's got their back will get them into treatment and they can get back on that road to recovery knowing that they're going to have a job when they come back out, right? So that's what we're trying to do. Have an open door policy, encourage others to do the same, ask questions, and become informed. I know we're right at time, but does anybody have any questions for me? Did you guys get together and be like, don't ask questions, get the hell out of here? Fine. Okay. You certainly can. So here's my contact information. I also have business cards. I'll put those out here for you. I am going to ask if you want a copy to contact me for that copy because I will not remember right now if you ask me for a copy. I just won't. So here's the business cards. I'll put them up here for you guys. I really do appreciate the opportunity to present this information for you. I'm so happy to give you guys options, that it's not the same as it's always been. So thank you all. Stay safe. Have a great rest of the afternoon. And thank you guys again for your time. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.